Hi everyone, I'm David Aragona, and this is the November 18th edition of Horses to Watch, where I highlight some horses to follow and potentially bet back on the New York circuit and walk you through a little bit of the trip handicapping process. Last week on this episode, I highlighted three turf races. It was opening week at Aqueduct. We had a bias on the turf course. We didn't see that this week because they put the rails up, and that really eliminated the rail bias that we saw last week. So instead of focusing on turf racing, this week I'm going to focus on four dirt races. And we're going to begin on Thursday's card at Aqueduct, where they got a ton of rain, sloppy track all day on both Thursday and Friday. But we're going to look at the sixth race Thursday. It's a maiden claiming race for 2-year-old fillies. And I want to start by focusing on the head-on of the start for this race because you're going to see something kind of wacky happen as we break these horses from the gate. Watch the two inside horses as the horse in the number four in the second two post position is going to veer to the inside and carry the number three, Viva La Liberte, into the gap and really just eliminate the chances of both of those horses. And you can see that Viva La Liberty is far behind. We'll pick it up again now from the pan shot, and you see that they just veer right into that gap. It's a very dangerous situation. There are horses basically running at a rail in front of them, and the four horse who caused that problem, she's out of it, and Viva La Liberty, who got pushed into the rail from that inside post position. I think the chart caller had her 27 lengths back at the first call of this race, so she is going to be way off the screen for a good portion of this race, and just completely lost all chance. And I'm going to highlight her because you'll see that she does some running at the end of this race, but she's not going to come into your screen for a little while. This filly, she was a big long shot. This is just her third career start. She didn't do much running in her first couple of starts. Her last race was a slight improvement, but I think this race here, even though she finishes far back, represents a significant improvement on what we saw out of her in her first two races, because after that terrible start, she puts in a pretty significantly faster second quarter mile. If you look at Trackist numbers, where they really break down the splits, first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, she runs her second quarter in 23 and 4/5 seconds. And you see her coming into the screen now in that pink cap towards the back of the field. She ran her second quarter in 23 and 4, which was a second faster than anybody else in this race. And considering how far back she was in the early going, she does quite a bit of work at the end of this race to get up, I believe, for fifth. Now, she's beaten a long way, but the fact that she was able to pass half the field and really run the fastest portion of the race at the end, over a second faster than anybody else in the field, I think points to the fact that she ran a lot better than her final finish would suggest. And I think she's a filly that has subtly improved after her first three starts and can take another step forward next time when she gets, hopefully, a clean break at this same level. Moving on to Friday's card, November 13th at Aqueduct, we're going to take a look at the first race of the day. Again, this one's contested over a sloppy track as they got so much rain last Thursday and Friday at Aqueduct. We're staying with the maidens, though this one's a maiden special weight for the 2-year-old fillies. This was also an off-the-turf race, I should note, and the horse that I'm going to highlight, she was an MTO, so take note of that. She was the favorite in this race, the number one, Hit the WOAH. We'll break these horses from the gate, and I want to focus on this horse because she is the eventual winner of this race. And I don't often focus on horses that win races because their form is pretty exposed, but I want to highlight this filly because I think she ran deceptively well within the context of this race, even considering that she won. Moving down the backstretch here, she's the number one horse, and you saw she broke about a step slowly. That's really not detrimental, but what happens right here is the horse in front of her, the number two, starts to back up abruptly, and the number one, Hit the WOAH, just gets caught in behind her and really loses all her momentum, just gets stymied in behind that horse and drops back a good 3 or 4 lengths from the position that she was in. Now, Joel Rosario, her rider, is riding her up into position now to try to regain that lost momentum, and he passes the horse to the outside, but you see right here as they come to the top of the stretch, he's going to attempt to duck back into the rail and cut the corner, but again, the horse in front of him, that's tiring, drifts over to the inside, and he has to briefly pause and steady there. Now, Joel Rosario is so good in these situations. He never really allowed this filly to break her momentum, even though she was losing a little bit of ground. He sat chilly, didn't steady her, didn't take away her rhythm, and thus when the hill opened up on the inside, he was able to ride her up into that position, and she eventually is able to pass this leader to win pretty easily at the end of this race. The margin's about a length and a quarter. I thought she was much more the best than that, considering that ground she lost on the far turn. Now, this filly's interesting. As I said, she was an MTO in this race. She goes out for Christophe Clement. She does have a pretty big turf pedigree, so it's kind of curious is not entered for turf in this race, but she's one that I could see going to turf in the future. Regardless of that, though, she obviously has ability, whether it's dirt or turf, and she's one, given how well she ran in this race, I think will have no trouble stepping up against winners in her subsequent start. Moving on to Saturday's card at Aqueduct, we'll take a look at two races from that day. The track had dried out by this point. I think it was officially listed as muddy, but it was a harrowed surface, so much closer to good than I think the sloppy track that we saw on both Thursday and Friday. We're going to start by taking a look at the fifth race on Saturday. Now, this one is for the 2-year-olds going 7 furlongs, a maiden special weight. And this is a race that featured a lot of first-time starters, a lot of horses that appeared to have pedigrees that said they should be runners. It's just a race, though, that it looked like a lot of the first-time starters weren't quite ready to be cranked up first time out, and we might not have seen the best they had to offer. A first-time starter does win this race, but I don't think it was the one that many anticipated, the number 8 Wolfie's Dynaghost. But I want to instead focus on the number 1, Dynamic One, and the number 12, Unbridled Honor. Let's break these horses from the gate. You'll notice that the number 1, Dynamic One, just completely blows the start. He comes out about 3 lengths behind the rest of the field. We do see the top Pletcher horses sometimes not be the quickest from the gate, but this was pretty bad. This horse just was not prepared for the start at all, and it really took away whatever chance he might have had. He was the 2-to-1 favorite in this race, so he was the Pletcher horse that was really bet and expected to do well first time out, but given that start, he really had no chance. The other horse that I want to focus on is that number 12, Unbridled Honor, and he broke alertly. He was up towards the front in the early going and just kind of got outrun down the backstroke. And you see his rider, John Velasquez, is pushing him along, trying to get him to stay in touch with the field. The problem for Unbridled Honor is he just looks a little bit green, and John Velasquez is going to put him in behind horses. They come around the far turn here, take a little bit of dirt in his face, and this horse just doesn't seem to react to it very well. He's now dropping back again. He's ultimately going to be last by the time they reach to the top of the stretch, whereas you see his stablemate, Dynamic One, he's wheeled out to the center of the track trying to make up ground, but his race was already lost, and the fact that he's losing so much ground going wide, that just really puts the nail in the coffin for him. But Unbridled Honor, take note of him between horses now in that pink cap. He's not giving up, and once he finds a little bit of daylight, he's actually finishing up pretty well in this race, and he's ultimately going to get up for 5th. He never was a threat to these top 3 finishers, but you'll notice the disparity in the way these horses look as they come to the wire. These top 3 really are just completely clean. They never got any dirt kicked in their face, whereas the horses behind them are just completely covered in dirt. And I think we saw as the day played out on Saturday, while they were letting the track dry out, I don't think they watered it that much. And typically when you see that at Aqueduct, where they're not watering the track, it can get into a situation where the kickback is really detrimental to the horses trying to rally through traffic. And we saw that with Unbridled Honor. He was kind of reacting badly and having to run through horses. So I think he ran deceptively well in this race as a first-time starter that was green. And Dynamic One, obviously, given the money that he took, he's one that you want to give another shot to, assuming he can break cleanly next time out. But Unbridled Honor, he's the one that I'd be most interested in out of this race, especially if he can stretch out in the future. The final race to take a look at is actually the final race from Saturday at Aqueduct, and we're going to veer away from the 2-year-olds for a second and look at some older horses. This was a New York bred claiming 25,000 race going 6 furlongs on the dirt, and I want to focus on the big favorite in this race, the number 6, the Caretaker. Let's break these horses from the gate straight away, and you'll notice that the Caretaker, in those orange silks, he actually breaks okay. He's a horse that comes from a little bit off the pace, but Jose Lezcano does a good job getting him up into the pack here. He's about in that second flight of runners in 3rd or 4th. But what happens here is the speed doesn't really materialize, and the pack is still very bunched. And he's going to get shuffled back now into about this 3rd flight here in behind horses, and Jose Lezcano is going to elect to put him down on the inside and just try to save some ground for the turn. But what happens here is the 2 horses that are ahead of him start to prematurely back up in his face. And it just turns out that he chose the wrong path to run in, because horses outside of him, they're moving up, but the horses down towards the inside, they're going backwards. And the Caretaker, who had such good position a few strides out of the gate, now as they come to the quarter pole, suddenly he's shuffled all the way back to last place. And, you know, even for a horse who's favored, you just can't make up this much ground after losing all that momentum on the far turn. And finally, Jose gets him to the outside here and is trying to ask him to finish, but he just can't make up this ground, especially given the situation I mentioned earlier, where horses had trouble running through kickback. That just was too much of a mountain for him to climb, even though he was the 2-to-1 favorite in this race. Now, he was going out for Linda Rice this day, but he was actually claimed out of this race for that $25,000 tag by Tom Morley. Tom Morley's not a guy that's afraid to move horses up in class. So if this one's doing okay coming out of this race, I wouldn't be surprised to see him back at that New York bred non-winners of 2 other than level in for the $40,000 tag. That's where he had been running competitively prior to this, and Linda dropped him in for the 25,000. That might have been somewhat alarming, and people might take it as a negative that he ran fourth in this race, but I think the trip had everything to do with it, and he'll run much better if he moves up in class next time, as long as he's able to hold this current form. Well, those are all the horses to watch for this week. Remember, you can always add these horses to your DRF watch mail on DRF.com if you want to follow them moving forward. You'll get updates via email for their workouts, their entries, their results. That's how I like to follow a lot of these horses and potentially bet them back in the future. So hopefully we have some success with these horses following down the line, and stay tuned and tune in again next week, I should say, for 3 more replays as I do a little more trip handicapping on horses to watch.